Imagine that you want to exchange phone numbers with someone. How does that whole process happen? Well, obviously, you have to memorize your own phone number and manually read that number out to the other person. But of course, that's not enough, because the other person then has to manually type that number into their phone and call you. Then, once you both have each other's number, you have to add the new number to your contacts, which means
navigating to the new contact menu, manually typing the name of the other person along with any other information you want to include, and then saving it.
kind of a tedious process, right? Well, what if you didn't need to do any of that? What if you could just open an app, checkmark a name, hold down a button, and all of your contact information is traded instantly? No memorizing, no typing anything, just a simple swap. Sounds crazy, right? Sounds like a super advanced idea that couldn't possibly be done today. There's no way a phone app could do that. Okay, I'm being sarcastic here. Obviously this can be done. I tried to do it. But the further I went down the road of app development, the more I realized that this project was not going to be as easy as it seemed. My name is Sebastian Rey, and this is the episode where I discuss NumberSwap, the app we should have had a long time ago. In the first half of this episode, I'm going to tell the whole story behind the app, and in the second half, I'm going to get into the actual details of how NumberSwap was supposed to function, along with all my weird ideas for the app, which may or may not work. But before I get into all that, let me make something clear. I want someone to take this idea and do something with it. Since I wasn't able to finish building NumberSwap myself, the only way this app is ever likely to see the light of day is if someone else builds it. So now with all that out of the way, here's the story of how NumberSwap almost came about. Around 2015, when I was still living in my parents' house after dropping out of college, I had the basic idea for NumberSwap. At the time, I didn't think it was an important thing. At that time, I was mostly focusing on writing my book and working out what my future was going to look like. But after I moved to another city, and after I settled in and found a job, I started thinking about my list and how to tick these ideas off. And the easiest item to strike off my list, I thought, would be this NumberSwap idea. It was definitely the simplest thing on my list, so I thought it would be a pretty good place to start while I was working on my book. I can learn to code and just make the app myself. And if that doesn't work, I can just pay someone to do it. Well, let me tell you, I tried both of those things, and both experiences were not what I thought. Now, I might be an outlier here, but I've always preferred Android over iPhone, and I wanted to work on the Android version of the app. So I bought a book which teaches the basics of Kotlin, which is a programming language for Android apps. The book was called Atomic Kotlin. I've got a couple things to say about this book, alright? First off, the way they explain things can be so clunky and awkward. Maybe whoever wrote this book, English wasn't their first language, because so many of the examples make very little sense when you first read them. Some of the explanations were perfectly clear and concise, and then there would be sections that I'd have to read 4 or 5 times to understand what the hell they were talking about. It was over 2 years ago that I read this thing, so I don't remember everything in it, but I do remember that the book was very tough for me to get through, especially since I was learning coding for the first time. And you know what? As a side note, I think this is actually a big problem with a lot of science and tech literature. There are so many smart people who go into these fields and make big innovations and important contributions, but they can't explain their ideas at all. Actually understanding what they're talking about requires you to know about the subject, and if you're just starting, you're obviously not going to know about the subject. I mean, I had to force myself to read this book because so much of it was poorly explained. And I'm not trying to single out Atomic Kotlin, I just think it's an example of a greater problem. Anyway, so I spent about 4 months trying to get through Atomic Kotlin. I got through most of it and I tried running some extremely basic apps. But getting those working was a huge headache, and at a certain point I realized that if I wanted to actually make NumberSwap the way I wanted, it was going to take years of coding experience. Coding is just not something I'm geared toward. It's not something I could simply pick up on the weekends. There's too much that you have to know. When you learn to code, you are quite literally learning to talk to a computer, and there are so many systems and working parts in modern computer software and hardware that each device is really like its own separate world. And guess what? If you want to learn to code an app that works for both Android and iPhone, you have to learn 2 completely separate worlds, and you have to get those worlds to work together. Even if I could have built NumberSwap on my own, I knew it was going to take me 5, maybe 10 years to get good enough, and I'm just not willing to spend that much time on a single item on my list. Okay then, I thought, maybe I can find a programmer or programming team and I can pay them to work on it. So I shopped around. I didn't know where to look, so I started on those job posting sites like Upwork and Freelancer, but the people on those sites were looking for $30 to $70 an hour to work on apps, which was something I just couldn't afford on my $30,000 a year job. So I went to the only place where I knew things would be affordable, Fiverr. Boy, was that a mistake. I should have known that a phone app you get from Fiverr wasn't exactly going to be the cream of the crop, but I thought, well, a basic working app is probably better than nothing, and over time, maybe small improvements can be made to the app until it gets to the point where it's smooth and nice and people use it. So I went on Fiverr, and I found a programming team that I thought might be able to do this. They had some apps that looked okay, and they advertised themselves as having extensive front-end and back-end experience, working on Android and iPhone apps. It seemed like they might be able to accomplish what I was looking for, so I messaged the account manager. He was friendly enough, and I asked him a couple technical questions, and he seemed like he knew what he was talking about. So I said, alright, let's do this. This is where the first problem came in. At first, the account manager was responsive and got back to me quickly, but as time went on, he was taking longer and longer to respond. In the beginning stages, I was fine with that. I figured this is just how app development goes. You can't get everything done right away. The problem was that he kept promising me that they would get things done right away. And when there finally was an update, not only would there be little progress on what he said, but in many cases he would send me stuff that I didn't even ask for, like separate pages that I never talked about. Or, for example, when I was first messaging the manager, he told me they'd provide a logo. So I told him what I wanted the logo to look like and gave him a concept to use. And they just never used it. When they finally delivered the first version of the app, it had a completely different logo. And things like that just kept happening over and over. It was like I'd asked for something, they'd promise to get back to me quickly, then days or weeks later I'd get an update, and it wasn't what I asked for, and then I'd have to ask them to change X, Y, and Z, and the manager would promise me, okay, sure, we'll get that done right away, no problem. And then the whole process repeats. Again, I don't have an issue with app development taking a long time. It took me 4 months just to learn how to run a basic program. What I don't like is being lied to. If it's gonna take a while, just say it's gonna take a while. If it's gonna take a whole year to develop, I can prepare for that. But don't keep promising me something will be done in a couple days and then not have anything ready in that time. If you keep making promises and breaking them, eventually I'm not gonna trust what you say. Now, in all fairness, I was asking a lot of them from the beginning. There was also a language barrier, which was probably part of the reason they kept sending me things I didn't want. But the problem is, the account manager explicitly told me that what I was asking for was reasonable and that his team could do it. And then they just wouldn't do what I asked. At one point, they were taking so long to respond that I started to get suspicious. Was this Fiverr job actually a scam? Do they just steal people's ideas and build their apps so they can make money off them? And since they're in another country, I can't do anything about it? Funnily enough, I ended up confronting the account manager about this. Interesting how he got back to me right away about that. He clearly had time to answer me then. And of course, he tried to reassure me that no, this isn't a scam, but at that point I was already almost done with them. It was obvious that this whole thing was not headed in a good direction. Ultimately, the real idiot was me for trying to get a complicated app built off Fiverr. Fiverr is like a portal to hell. Nothing enters there and leaves, at least not in a favorable condition. But again, Fiverr was all I could afford. I guess the saying, you get what you pay for, really is true sometimes. After something like 5 months of development, they had just barely gotten a version of the app that could actually send a number from one phone to the other. But if you wanted to swap both numbers, you needed to take extra steps. Also, the app didn't look at all how I wanted, it didn't have the same kind of checkmark function I'd asked for, and I remember there was another very basic thing that the app couldn't do, like adding fields of information to a contact, aside from your phone number and email. And the guy told me that if I wanted that feature, they were basically going to have to start over and rebuild the whole thing. And at that point I just said, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not. So I pulled out. And that was the end of Number Swap, at least for my part. A little while later, I searched for more competent programmers and even messaged a couple, but there was nothing I could afford. There was one team I found that looked really good, but when I messaged them, they said they typically charge $200,000 to $300,000 for an app. And I was just like, welp, that's not gonna happen. I still think Number Swap is a good idea. I really believe that people would use it, and there are some cool features that I think you could include in an app like this, which I'll talk about in a bit. But after that incident, I kinda just gave up on it. Clearly, app development is not my wheelhouse. So how was Number Swap supposed to work? What were the features I imagined it having? This is the part of the episode where I'm gonna talk about all that. Believe it or not, there were actually a lot of things I wanted to do with this app aside from swapping numbers. Ultimately, I envisioned this as potentially being a replacement for the phone app, so let's talk about it. Obviously, the main thing you'd want an app like NumberSwap to do is swap numbers with the press of a button. But how exactly is that transaction supposed to happen? How do you know you're actually swapping numbers with the right person? What if you want to give your friend's phone number to someone instead of your own phone number? What if you want to give a fake number to someone? What if you want to swap numbers with multiple people at the same time? What if you want to do a one-way exchange where one person sends and one person receives? Well, I went through a good bit of workshopping on all of this, and I came up with a system that I think makes sense. And of course, this system is just a starting point. But here's what I got. First off, NumberSwap should allow you to create multiple accounts. One account might have my real phone number on it, but let's say I'm a hot girl and a bunch of dudes are constantly asking for my number, and sometimes I want to give them a fake number. I should be able to go to the Accounts or Contacts screen, where all my contacts and accounts are listed, and where I can create new accounts and contacts. From that screen, I select which account or contact I want to use. Whichever account or contact I selected, that's what gets shared when I press the swap button. And obviously, I should be able to create as many accounts or contacts as my phone's memory will allow. Also, if I want to receive someone's number without giving anything to the other person, there could be a special receive account I can select. In any case, once I select an account, my phone will then take me to the swap screen. Now the swap screen should have a few important features. At the bottom, there's of course the swap button. Now in order to actually swap numbers with someone, both of you should have to hold down the swap button at the same time, not just press the swap button. The reason is because anyone can accidentally press a button, but it's pretty hard for two people to hold down a button at the same time by accident. It can happen, I'm sure, but it's pretty unlikely to happen. After a second or two of holding down the swap button, the number exchange takes place, and whatever information was in the account you selected, even if it was just an email address, that gets swapped into the other person's phone. The new account will then appear in your contacts. Okay, but how do you know you're swapping numbers with the right person? What if you're at a party and a bunch of people are swapping numbers? Couldn't your phone accidentally swap numbers with the wrong person? This is where the checkmark feature comes in. On the swap screen, your phone should basically have a list of phones or names, with checkboxes next to each name. Before you can perform a swap, you have to checkmark the person whose number you want to swap with. Once both of you have checkmarked each other, then a swap can happen. If only one person hits the checkmark but the other person doesn't, your swap button will be grayed out and no swap can be performed. This is to prevent swapping with the wrong person. Now here's an issue I ran into. On the swap screen, there will obviously be a list of phones and names you can swap numbers with, but which names should appear is a bit of a tricky problem. What if there are two people named Cassandra that appear on your swap page? How do you know which one to checkmark? Here's the solution I came up with. The name that appears on the swap screen should of course be based on the account or contact you just selected, but also there should be some other kind of identifying information next to each name. For example, your phone's make and model appear next to the contact name. But what if everyone is using the same phone? Well, maybe every person's phone should also have a unique ID which is automatically generated when you download NumberSwap, and is always tied to your specific phone. So when you're on the swap page looking at other people's phones, the contact name shows up, the phone's make and model shows up, and the unique ID shows up next to each name. Maybe you could even add some personality to it and make it so that contacts can have customizable colors and patterns, so that your account stands out from other people's accounts on the swap screen. By having all these identifying features, there should be less confusion about who you're swapping with. And if you want to swap numbers with multiple people at the same time, you just have to checkmark multiple names. And as long as all the names have checkmarked each other, a party swap can be performed. Another idea I toyed around with is what happens after a swap takes place. I thought about having some sort of dialog box or pop-up box which displays all the contacts your phone just received, and this dialog box allows you to modify any of the information in those boxes before saving the new contacts into your phone. However, some people might just want to skip this step, so maybe there should be a setting which allows users to automatically save new contacts rather than showing any sort of pop-up. There should also be some way of telling which account or contact you currently have selected when you're on the swap page. It's a small thing, but it's important. You don't want to accidentally share the wrong information with someone else when you're performing a swap. Here's yet another issue I ran into. How should your phone list names on the swap screen? In other words, which names should appear at the top of the screen and which ones should appear at the bottom? My first idea was to do it based on proximity. Whoever's phone is closest to yours appears at the top of your swap screen. But how exactly do you determine proximity? Do you base it on Wi-Fi? Do you base it on Bluetooth? The team I worked with wanted to use a combination of NFC and Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi to detect the phones and NFC to perform the actual swap. But the problem with this system is that Wi-Fi can be a bit iffy when it comes to determining the exact proximity of things, at least from what I gathered in my limited time working on this. Also, what if I want to swap numbers with someone who's across the room rather than right next to me? If names are based on proximity, I would have to scroll down the list and kind of guess which person's phone is the one I want to swap numbers with. And obviously that's not a great solution. There is one potential way to solve this problem, which I'm about to discuss. But I'll be honest, it's not a solution that I like. The reason I don't like it is because I think it's frankly dystopian, and it probably wouldn't be good for society. But it could technically work. The idea is proximity chat. Let's say that I spot a cute girl across the room and I want to talk to her, but I'm too much of a coward to actually walk up and say hi. Well, using number swap, there could be a way of actually messaging someone through the swap screen. Basically, each name on the swap screen could have a tiny message box next to it or underneath it, which shows a preview of any messages you've gotten from them. And if you click on the message box, it expands to a full screen chat, where you can send and receive messages between you and that person. And once you leave the area, or after a certain amount of time, the messages are deleted forever. So instead of having to guess which phone I want to swap numbers with, I can send a simple message to a few phones, saying, "Girl in red dress?" And if she responds with, "Boy in white shirt," you now have a connection, and you can both talk and exchange numbers from across the room. Obviously, people are going to troll this system and use it to send inappropriate messages to random people's phones. The good thing is, if you implement what I said before, any messages you get should be tied to a specific phone and a specific ID. So if someone is sending you messages you don't want, it should be possible to determine who's sending those messages by simply looking at the ID. And as long as there's a block feature which allows you to block certain IDs, then you should be able to prevent yourself from receiving chat messages which come from certain people's phones. It should also be possible to disable the chat feature entirely. Especially if you're a parent concerned about the messages your kid is getting. There should be some parental control feature that allows parents to have complete control over the proximity chat feature, disabling it permanently if they want. But in my honest opinion, lewd messages are not even the worst part. Something like proximity chat could end up actually encouraging antisocial behavior. The same way that the internet has enabled people to interact more online and less in person, the nature of what proximity chat is could encourage people to talk more through chat and less through face-to-face interactions, even when people are in the same room as you. It's possible that proximity chat could end up being a good thing. By having a way to communicate with someone before talking to their face, it might actually bring many people out of their shell and allow them to open up more, which could generate more friendships and relationships. But I know people, and I know that most folks, most of the time, are gonna default to whatever's convenient. And I can easily see something like proximity chat enabling people to talk less and communicate less, at least in terms of face-to-face interactions. Personally, I really don't like the idea of proximity chat as a solution. I think proximity chat opens up a can of worms that I don't think we should open. But that is just my opinion. Some people might want the proximity chat feature, and if the majority of people want it, there's nothing I can really do about that. And it would technically solve the problem of distant swaps. But this is all hypothetical at this point. Until someone actually develops number swap, none of this can happen. So if you have better ideas, I'd encourage you to do something with them. I have also considered the possibility that, eventually, once number swap becomes big enough, you could also use it to make phone calls and send normal text messages. But that's way in the future, and people might not actually care about that. So, that's it. Those are my ideas on number swap. I haven't decided on the next episode's topic yet, as is becoming the norm for this podcast, which means the next episode probably will be out in another month. In any case, my name is Sebastian Rey, this is the List Podcast, and I'll talk to you in the next one.